Hey, welcome back, everyone. It's a people track today. And here with me, I have a colleague of mine, occupational psychologist at Container Solutions, Helen Bartimote. Welcome, Helen. And she's going to talk about the resilient cloud native organizations and how did they look and why it's so important. So yeah, it's all yours. The stage is yours, Helen.
Great, thank you, Roman, and welcome everyone to my talk today. So the resilient organisation, what this looks like and why it's so important. And my name is Helen Bartimote. I'm a psychologist, as Roman said, with Container Solutions, and I've worked as an occupational psychologist for a couple of decades now, amazingly, with various organisations. And this is a theme that comes up a lot. You know, how can we prepare ourselves for adversity? What can we do? What should we be thinking about? It's not just from an individual perspective, but an organisational, and it's the latter that this talk is focused on today. And what I would encourage you to do as I'm talking is just think about the organisations that you're currently with or work for as a consultant, and you know, how resilient do you think they are currently in the face of, you know, when a potential crisis might hit. So Dr. Erica Seville is a director of a research group called Resilient Organisations. And I'm going to be talking a lot about her work throughout my talk today. And here's an interesting quote that she comments in her book. So each organisation will have its own perfect storm, a combination of events or circumstances that has the potential to bring adversity to any organisation. I really like this quote, and I like the analogy of a perfect storm, because it summarises for me the unexpected nature that a crisis, an extreme crisis, can present to an organisation, and how traumatic that can be. You know, it comes without warning, very unexpected. And, you know, we like to think that we are in control of every eventuality. But, you know, we only have to look at the last 18 months to realise that this is absolutely not the case. So what I have next on this slide is it's a little bit depressing, but you know, it's an overview of situations that have occurred that we can describe as sort of hyper crises that have significantly affected organisations. So here in the top left-hand corner, the company Swiss Air were actually viewed as the flying bank. They were viewed as highly successful, very solid organisation. Thriving, in fact, and very sadly after 9/11 they went into administration just a few weeks after, and it turned out that there was you know, a sense from employees of many years prior of feeling silenced and not having issues out in the open, or not having their problems or observations heard by senior management. We have the threat of actual individuals bringing down whole organisations through their unethical, dysfunctional, toxic behaviours, and leading to entire organisations collapsing, again completely unexpected, out of the blue seemingly. This picture here, ego and greed, this was Nick Leeson in the early 90s in the United Kingdom, and he brought down a bank, an investment bank that's actually 200 years old, individually through his unauthorised trading, costing $1.3 billion. And then I'm sure you're aware of Bernie Madoff, how he's defrauded customers up to the tune of $65 billion through his individual actions. You know, so we'll talk about that, sort of those dysfunctional, unethical type behavioural situations as well in this talk. And then we have these, you know, natural disasters, unexpected, out of the blue, can obviously significantly impact on organisations. And of course, recently, COVID, which has brought down many companies very, very sadly. So before we go into the models that I want to talk about with you today, just want to go through this quote. So resilience is the ability to not only survive, but also to thrive after a major crisis in a world of uncertainty and change. And this definition can be sort of applicable to individuals, but today, we're obviously thinking about organisations. So why do some organisations totally collapse after a traumatic, unexpected event? And why do others not only go on to survive, but actually go on and thrive? They seemingly grow stronger. Resilience is the ability to adapt and change to the circumstances faced. But what can organisations do prior to this major crisis occurring? Before I answer that question, I just want to draw your focus to this small model here. So if you read about resilience in the psychological literature, you will often come across a researcher, Professor Martin Seligman. And he began his work into looking at resilience many decades ago, actually with the US Army. He was invited to go in and look at the reasons why some individuals were falling apart, experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, high levels of anxiety and depression, and others not. And what he found was, yes, there was a small group who were collapsing, the trauma was too much, they're experiencing many, many difficult symptoms following. He found the majority of individuals were resilient. But interesting to him is this very small group who he could see were actually going on to become stronger after the traumatic event. They were developing what he called post-traumatic growth. And what his research showed him was that these individuals, and he calls this the PERMA model, which is a sort of well-being model, they had certain commonalities. They knew how to experience positive emotions. That's the P in the PERMA model. They were engaged. They knew how to remain engaged in the work that they're doing, in with others. They had a sense of engagement. Relationships. They knew how to develop relationships with others and maintain relationships, and they invested time into this. And meaning, they had meaning, a sense of purpose in their life, and they'd also experienced achievement. So they knew how to set goals, and they knew what it felt like to experience success. And he realized that those were key attributes that enabled someone to go on and experience a sense of not only being resilient, but post-traumatic growth. And the same applies to organisations. If you consider the PERMA model in relation to organisations, so let's think about, what makes the collective resilient? So I've just talked about individual. What enables a group to be able to collaborate and become, resilient, form of resilience? And this now brings me back to Erica Seville's work. So over the 15 years, and I've got it here, this book is all about resilient organisations. So you can't really see that, but it's resilient organisations, and there's so much detail in here if you are interested. But there are 13 indicators that I'm going to talk through over the next sort of 15 minutes, so bear with me. But the core three areas are this: leadership and culture, network and relationships, and being change ready. So leadership and culture I'll probably spend longer on that area than the others, because this, as a psychologist, this is the area I'm most interested in. And I'm just going to talk to you about 3 different models that I feel are really important in this cluster of leadership and culture. And we talk a lot about this in Container Solutions, and we use various sort of attached tools and mechanisms that are linked to these models. And essentially, what I'm interested in as a psychologist in terms of effective leadership and healthy cultures is minimizing dysfunctional cultures and dysfunctional leadership behaviors, and basically creating a healthy and a great place to work where it feels good to everybody, and it's not just, and it's authentic. So it's embedded in processes and practices, and it has real meaning. I really like this model. I'm sure many of you have heard of this book by Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I really like it because I feel as though it really neatly summarises all the components that are important to consider. So you can see very clearly in the triangle the dysfunctions. So when a team, a group, an organisation is behaving in a dysfunctional way, it's likely that these areas are occurring. So an absence of trust. If you've heard some of the other talks today, Andrea's talk, Joe's talk, trust is mentioned a lot. And it's this, showing vulnerability increases trust, because, it's showing that human side of you, which we all want to see. And, that has to come from the top, the leaders, the executive teams. If there's an absence of trust, it's likely there's a lot of other difficulties, toxic behaviours, dysfunctionality occurring. If there's a fear of conflict, so if there's an artificial harmony, then there's going to be difficulties. Lack of commitment, so if there's ambiguity, so if it's not clear to individuals, whether that's to do with goals, direction, strategy, role clarity, but there's a lack, there's an ambiguity to that creates difficulty. And avoidance of accountability, so maybe not confronting difficult issues, or not having clear standards for everyone within the team or the organisation. And an inattention to results. And why might there be an inattention to results? Is there an issue with who are the leaders, how they have been selected? Is that based on status and ego, charisma, as opposed to actual competence? So by focusing on the collective outcomes of the team, the group, the organisation, and not focusing on status or ego, again, we're reducing the dysfunctionality within the group, in the team. So I really like this model, and I think the book is also very interesting, and it just helps to start thinking about that within your own teams and groups. Psychologically safe cultures. So again, we talk a lot about this in Container Solutions, and we're of course referring to Amy Edmondson's amazing work on this, and her book The Fearless Organisation covers this in much detail. And essentially, the construct psychological safety is about the shared belief held by members of a team that that team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So, it's not about everyone being nice to each other and, avoiding having difficult conversations. It's actually about having those difficult conversations, but knowing it's safe to do so. We've got quite a nice model here. So, it's about being psychologically safe and knowing that it's okay and feeling comfortable to admit mistakes. Creating a sense, a culture where individuals learn from failure, and failure is spoken about and accepted, that failure will happen and does happen. And it leads to everyone feeling comfortable with sharing ideas, which if an organisation is facing an extreme crisis, this is absolutely critical. It leads to better innovation and better decision making. If that's not in place, if there's a fear of admitting mistakes, then that will lead to blame. People will search to blame others. Team members are less likely to share their different views, and this is where we start to negatively have the group dynamics affecting decision making. I also want to talk about emotional intelligent behaviours. Again, thinking about, I mean, this all connects with each other, but the leadership piece of Erica Seville's model. And this is what I take from that in terms of leadership, because emotional intelligent behaviours to me are, you know, absolutely critical to the success of the leadership and success of the team, the group, the organisation. But, you know, we talk about this a lot, don't we? But does everyone have clarity over what we actually mean? What does the research tell us about emotional intelligence, and how do we best define it? I love this model by Dr. Stephen Stein. This is also linked to a great questionnaire inventory that we use, the EQI, which measures this in individuals but also has a 360. And you can use it predominantly in coaching and development. You can also use it in hiring. And as you can see, this very clearly defines for us what we actually are talking about when we're using the term emotional intelligence. So, you know, we have this piece at the top about self-perception. You know, what sort of, how does an individual view themselves? How accurate is that view? How clear are they in terms of the direction that they want to go, and how aware are they of their emotional landscape? What is their self-regard? Then we have the self-expression. Obviously, you know, expression is the opposite of repression. So people know how to clearly communicate the emotions that they're feeling. Obviously, this is all linked. So you have to know what emotions you're experiencing to be able to communicate those clearly and accurately. And then we have the interpersonal piece, the skill of developing healthy relationships. Joe mentioned earlier in his talk about the importance of empathy. You know, it's great to be able to feel the empathy, it's vital, but also there needs to be the skill of expressing that clearly to others. You can have high empathy, but low self-expression. And there we have difficulty. And then decision making, so being able to make decisions based on reality, actual reality, and problem solving difficult circumstances. And that stress management piece, being able to manage and tolerate stress when in those extreme situations and still make clear and accurate decisions. So that covers sort of the leadership and culture for me from the psychological perspective. And now in terms of this model by Erica Seville, it neatly fits into all of those different areas. You know, in terms of staff engagement, you know, people need to feel connected. They need to feel, you know, that they are heard. They need to, you know, have their voice heard, and there needs to be practices and processes in place for that. You know, situational awareness. There needs to be good practices in place to ensure that people will share the potential problems that they see. So, you know, if they're not feeling in a safe, psychologically safe environment, or if the communication and emotional intelligence skills from the leaders are not there, when those problems and challenges are happening and people can see them, they're not going to be sharing them if that's not in place. Innovation and creativity needs to be highly valued, you know, so again, the psychological safety of you know, feeling that all ideas can be shared, and there isn't this threat that, oh, you know, maybe they don't want to hear this, or maybe this is you know, this is not the best idea. It doesn't matter. It's about having that space where people feel safe to do that. Leads to much better innovation and creativity. And the decision making, you know, so individuals can challenge and be challenged. You know, emotionally intelligent, really authentic, successful leadership, there has to be a piece of receiving feedback regularly and knowing that even though that's challenging and difficult and uncomfortable, that will still happen. So that when these really major crises occur, these areas are all in place. So just a little slide on staff engagement. So it's that sense of having competence, so the hiring processes are accurate and unbiased, that individuals are committed, connected and supported. And the way in which we achieve this is through those, as I said, the sort of psychologically safe culture, the emotionally intelligent leadership behaviours, and reducing potential for dysfunctionality within the group. So I just wanted to go into these other areas on Erica Seville's model, all equally as important as one another. Now, in order to survive the crisis and to thrive, her research has shown us that networks and relationships are also critical. So, effective partnerships. Organisations and leaders need those 3 a.m. friends, 3 a.m. contacts, people that they know they can call at 3 a.m. and that call will be answered. So understanding relationships and resources that the organisation might need to access in a crisis. Internal resources, how will the business operate as usual and also provide extra capacity for what's going on and what's being dealt with. How leveraging knowledge, how is critical information stored? Do people have access to that? And minimising silos, removing any barriers that might exist enables that stronger, resilient organisation to be prepared and ready. And lastly, this sort of the change ready piece was identified as being another sort of critical component. So it's this sense of being change ready. So having a proactive posture, not waiting for the world to come to you, not waiting until, a major significant crisis occurs, but starting to think now about, are we paying attention to what the research tells us is important for this organisation, for any organisation to be considering. Unity of purpose. Does everyone understand what the priorities are within your organisation, but also following a crisis? Understanding what's the minimum operating requirements. Planning strategies. So the development and the evaluation of plans and strategies to manage vulnerabilities. And this might be actually an area that many organisations are doing, but maybe that's one area, but all the others could potentially need a lot more focus, and the stress testing plans as well. Erica Seville's team highlighted this as being another factor which enables an organisation to function and leads to a higher level of resilience. So participation of staff in simulations and scenarios designed to practice those sorts of response arrangements. So there we have the full model. And like I said, there's a really lots of detail in the book by Erica Seville, which if you are interested, I would recommend you having a look at, because that's great. So the leadership and culture, network and relationships, and being change ready, these are the key areas to focus on. And I hope you can see how I've brought in the other sort of aspects that for me as a psychologist are absolutely paramount. That emotional intelligent aspects, the psychologically safe, culture, and creating, sort of having channels into all aspects of functioning within the organisation that are underpinned by those different areas. And I hope you can see the connection with all of these 13 indicators and those models that I've talked about. If you are interested, so firstly I want to ask, do you feel as though you've done enough? If you would like some help thinking about have you done enough in your organisation, then there's a really good questionnaire by Erica Seville's team here that you can go through that gives you an indication of, maybe which areas that you could focus on for your organization, and that's based on the model that I've just talked about. So that is my that is the end of my talk. If you want to contact me, carry on this conversation, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please do reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions now, because we have got 5 minutes that I've left for questions. I'd be really happy to answer anything you've got for me.
Yes, thank you, Helen. It was very interesting, and yeah, I lost track of time. I believe I was listening. I was like,
good.
That's the
end.
That's
a good sign.
That's already the end. So I have one question for you. How someone who applies for a job can recognize, right, that company has this during the interview process, right? These traits.
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, as much reading in terms of blogs that they have for you to, and the messaging, where their focus is, do they even talk about these concepts out, externally? Do they, when they're advertising jobs, what language are they using? And of course, policies and processes that they have in place. If you can ask them questions about certain policies, that might give you an insight. But I think the best thing is really to look at, do they communicate anything at all about the value and importance they place on the well-being and psychological health of their employees? And if so, what are they actually doing to support that messaging? Because it's very easy to say, we've got this amazing culture and we really care about our employees. But what are they actually doing to back that up? That's
so basically be brave and and try to actually ask it.
Yeah, and I think, if also you can, if you're looking at organizations sort of potentially for a job, look at what's the contact, how is the communication and the process you're going through in that very first point of contact. If you're having sort of really informal chats and then you're offered a job, you could say, well, how fair is this process? How biased is this process? Is that reflecting something else that's happening in this organization? So that's another area that you could maybe consider.
Okay, thank you. What would you say might be the red flags?
Red flags. Well, I think if an organisation does not openly communicate about how it values its employees, ensures the well-being, takes care. I mean, you can look at all the policies they have. What's their approach to flexible working? How do they attract diverse applications? How do they support equality, inclusion and diversity? There's a whole host of different areas that we could consider in order to get some insights when we're not in the organization.
I have actually the last very interesting question. How can men support each other psychologically? How can we learn from the other genders?
How can each other, well, can you say?
I think the question meant like men, the gender. Like, how can men support each other psychologically? How can we learn from the other genders?
Men?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think irrelevant of gender, it's important for people to feel comfortable showing vulnerability and having clear channels of communication, and you know, and taking the first step to maybe display those behaviours with one another, whatever that, in a whatever way, you know, depending on your role, your team. So just putting gender to one side, I would say let's focus on, you know, how do we show trust with one another? If I'm a leader, if I'm a manager, as that graphic, you know, go first. You know, share, be open, show vulnerability, talk about failure, and you know, try and role model those behaviors, being aware that actually maybe it does create some discomfort in me whilst I'm doing this, but I know based on research that this is something that's going to be good for this group, this team.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Helen.
Okay.
Just reminding everyone that we have a people's tab in the umbrella, so you can go and book a meeting or just talk to people there. Also, you can go say hi to JP at Cockroach Labs to learn about their serverless database in our sponsors tab. And see you all back in 10 minutes for our last session in the people track. Bye-bye.
Right. Thanks, Roman. Bye. Bye, everyone.